Hello, Something Guys and Gals, this is Something Guy 912. I'm going to paint a scenario for you. Imagine that you made a new franchise title game that is massively popular and successful, foreboding any scrutiny to its quality or hype, and decide that it's high time to make a sequel. You decide that you want to kill the main character of same previous title, knowing it would piss people off because of how much they love that character and the setup wherein, but you don't want to be blatant about it. So you tease your audience and manipulate the footage so that it looks as though the main character has a presence, only to dash their hopes with a caricature of one who ruthlessly kills said main character, and just to twist the knife further, try to force sympathy out of that character by playing as that character. Oh, and better yet, the people you've hired to make the game, you're forcing to slay through hours and hours to get the game out during a crisis to suit your own bottom line. Pretty shitty scenario, right? Now, imagine you're Jim Sterling on the outside of all this happening. You see all the memes mocking the game and the character who butchered said beloved character from previous title, and you have an axe to grind with in regards to a certain political leaning. Despite you being concerned with shady business practices and unethical corporate greed in the gaming industry, your political ideology supersedes your ethics. So you decide to debase the arguments against why said sequel is bad or why said character is awful, and you get Muscles of the Apocalypse, perhaps the worst video that Jim Sterling has ever put out yet. A while back, I had made a semi-biographical analysis of Jim Sterling's rise and fall and why most dismiss his credential when it comes to critiquing games or games media, as his own ideology blinds his ability to hold on to his dear principles regarding his disdain for loot boxes or microtransactions, as most have known to call him SJW Light, or just an improved version of Movie Bob. In it, I made it abundantly clear that while Jim can miss the market times, does have good points and arguments to make. Hell, he even convinced me that cosmetic microtransactions are equally as manipulative as utility-based microtransactions in a video a few years back, when I normally watch him on and off. A lot of that changed when it came to this particular video, as not only is Jim casually disingenuous about the criticisms levied at The Last of Us 2 and Abby's character, design notwithstanding, but perhaps it's the first time in his career that he completely fails to even make an argument. You'll know it when I cover a response format, but constantly Jim trips up on his own arguments when it suits him, making him almost contrarian in nature to why people have an issue with Abby or her design. More importantly, there is a noticeable contempt and revival of gamers, trademark, that Jim constantly spews throughout. Ironic given that his entire bread and butter is of video game media and by proxy, mocking his own fanbase in the process. Of course, this video was already covered by EFAP in their 100th podcast milestone, and normally I wouldn't be compelled to cover it myself if Jim wasn't so infuriatingly nonsensical in said video that sparked my desire to respond to it. Now, keep in mind, I have not played The Last of Us 2 or 1, and most of my input regarding the series is based on Mahler, Rags, and of watching several streams of Mahler playing it, as I believe them to be trustworthy when it comes to being impartial about said game. But if I get anything wrong in regards to my basis of the games, feel free to let me know, as I have little idea about the game as a whole. But even so, that still doesn't defeat the point of me responding to Jim himself, as he seems to blatantly ignore aspects about the game himself to suit his arguments, despite said arguments contradicting others within the same video. But long introductions aside, take it away, Jimbo.
Do you remember The Last of Us Part 2? That game that came out like 10,000 years ago? Well, some people haven't forgotten. Well, there's a particular aspect of the game they haven't forgotten and haven't forgiven. Because you see, there are muscles in The Last of Us Part 2. Lady muscles.
I want to additionally preface that I skipped the section of him doing his aristocrat impression and mentioning Fall Guys merch, as I felt it irrelevant to the points regarding the video. But notice how he's already leaning in on the idea of why people dislike The Last of Us 2? We'll keep that in mind as we go on, as he'll trip over that argument quite quick throughout.
And some of the comments I've been receiving whenever I've talked about this wonderful little topic have been so incredible they could only be delivered to you by a Georgian aristocrat.
First off, the comments you received were blatantly picked out by you that suit your already built up argument, and second, The gimmick of you portraying yourself as a Georgian aristocrat to mock the arguments made is quite literally building a straw man. In the video where I covered his vids, I stopped around roughly late 2015, which was before he adopted this mantra. But by far, this character he's built around is yet another stain on his career, as it's a convenient opportunity for him to not only cherry-pick bad arguments, or at least arguments he deems to be bad, but also to sarcastically paint his opposition as absurd. In fact, I characterize this attitude of his as the sarcastic straw man, when he knows he's lost the argument. But he's literally made a character around this flaw of his. But go on, Jim.
The character design of Abby sucks, and a majority of gamers agree.
I mean, I agree, but it's not because other people agree. And I know you'll pick certain images to prove that she isn't, but also proclaim that the game doesn't have to be realistic. But it's almost like they threw two ham hocks on a Ken doll.
No amount of crying and whining you do will change that.
Which is why you spent 23 minutes crying and whining to change that.
Yeah. Sorry that I don't like unattractive people.
Implying that Abby is unattractive, keep note, as he'll dance around her depiction as either being semi-attractive or non-conventionally attractive or straight up attractive. But what's the problem here, Jim? Do you like unattractive people because in your mind not doing so is bigoted? An attraction goes far more into the design of a character, but it's inconvenient for you to bring up that, so you'll dismiss it wholesale or proclaim that people actually don't like Joel in order to give Abby any leeway to be attractive.
I don't like a muscular woman. It's a turn-off.
And that's his opinion. The person is not stating it as fact if they say I, as in only the person speaking. Can people not have certain opinions about things even if you disagree with them? I mean, of course you do, but why be bothered about what someone else's preferences are when it doesn't contravene your own?
Those arms are realistic. On a man!
Men and women are biologically different, so yes, it would be more realistic on a man, but even so, it would still call to attention how jacked he would be in a post-apocalypse setting when everyone else is fairly leaf in stature. Again, keep this in mind as Jim seems to think that women having gains is equally the same as men having gains, and therefore people only care about muscles when it's on a woman.
Sure, women can bulk up like this, but in reality it's far less common than having large breasts.
Let's also keep in mind that TLOU2, EFAPers will get that reference, strives and has strived for as much realism as possible, so scrutiny in regards to her design is predicated on realism. If The Last of Us Part 1's character design was based on, Team Fortress 2 as an example, people wouldn't be as bothered with Abby's depiction as it would fall in line with the cartoonishly exaggerated features.
Whatever. I was never in the target demographic for this game.
It's odd that Jim would highlight this comment as it shows that the person has a completely indifferent experience to the game, and yet Jim mocks it for some reason. Is Jim saying it's bad to have a completely nonplussed reaction to the game or not care either way about its depiction?
Clearly not aimed at men who like feminine women.
And if that was the point of TLOU2, then I think it's fair to point it out, as I imagine people would be more fine with a feminine woman who happens to have some muscles, but you're the one who's going to tell me what's real or unreal.
I decide what is sexy.
I know Jim is screaming this too again, exaggerate the opposition, but we're going to find that that line equally applies to his ethos when it comes to this game and the blatant cognitive dissonance of its faults.
The things that the gamers decide to be upset about will never not be fascinating.
Yeah, funny that, Jim. If you pick and choose certain comments and decide to put them all into a single hive mind of gamers, of course you're going to think that all gamers think like that. Not even barring that said concerns are only the tip of the iceberg of the problems with The Last of Us Part 2. You're just generalizing at this point and using weasel words because you have no clue what the gamers think.
When I talk about the ways in which games are deliberately designed to manipulate and prey upon people, I'm told I'm beating a dead horse, even though literally nothing's been done about the problem of predatory monetization. In fact, it's only gotten worse, but I'm the one beating a dead horse.
And I say they're wrong for saying that, and I think you should point out the intrinsic issues of the gaming business. The problem here is that you seem to conveniently forget the time crunches and manipulative ways in which Last of Us 2 marketed its game, almost blatantly false advertising Joel's importance in the story as a way to get easy pre-order money. Your own ideology is a hubris, a crutch to your ability to see the blatant issues of a particular gaming topic, as demonstrated with your hatred of Gamergate and what its stated purpose was, or your dismissiveness with DOA X3 not being shipped to North America because of censorship.
When I discuss the issue of very real men in very real life using their positions of power and authority to mentally and physically harm others, I'm shouted down for being too political.
Again, it depends on context. If, for example, you decide to go on a rant debasing gamers for playing as a female protagonist, based on a quote by a higher-up gaming executive, despite how you never have trusted the input of what a focus-tested group or an out-of-touch mogul says, yes, your politics are getting in the way of your very established principles. If you take comments out of context from the source of the person saying it, and use it to debase gamers as if they all think the same in regards to Abby, again, you're being too political. You can call out shady shit without having to dress your politics over it, as you've demonstrated when it comes to railing on Randy Pitchford, in spite of the fact both of you are ideologically aligned in some ways.
But by the clammy wet hands of God, so help us all, when it comes to a woman in a mushroom zombie video game having big arms, it'll be an outrage that burns for months on end.
Yes, Jim, that's literally the only reason why people dislike TLOU2. Not that Abby killed a beloved character not hours into the game, not that the game tries to manipulate sympathy into Abby after the fact, not that its theme of vengeance is ruined by painting Ellie's campaign for vengeance as evil while Abby's is justified, or that TLOU2 has to retroactively change circumstances in the previous game in order to give Abby any wiggle room to be seen as sympathetic. It's just muscled. Again, the muscles are just the tip of the iceberg, Jim. There's a whole glacier of problems with The Last of Us 2 under the surface you're not willing nor able to see because it defeats this horse you are, as you state, beating to death with.
Abby in The Last of Us Part 2 is proving to be one of the most controversial Abby in The Last of Us Part 2 is proving to be one of the most non-controversial video game characters of all time.
Yeah, Jim. What's so non-controversial about spitting on the legacy of the prior game while trying to emotionally manipulate your audience to accept the shop given to them? What's non-controversial about Neil Druckmann getting a pay raise while his dev team were working to the bone for a pittance? Ironically enough, something you bemoaned when it came out Red Dead Redemption 2 had developers working double shifts to complete the story, yet seem to ignore here for the sake of painting the opposition again as evil. Keep fighting the straw man, Jim. It won't win you any prizes but vanity.
To ordinary human beings with some sort of purpose in life, or at least more than one hobby, Abby is a protagonist in a video game.
Always the prime way to convince people to your side is to mock and ridicule them, Jim. Keep going. I'm enamored when you call me a piece of shit because I don't take your argument on faith alone. Also, Jim, I wouldn't be waving the finger at other people who need a hobby when you felt the need to bring them up in the video. But yes, in the most simplistic of terms, Abby is a protagonist in a video game. That doesn't prove anything about your argument being true or theirs being wrong.
To the gamers TM, you know the ones I mean, she represents the downfall of the gaming medium.
Again, a pretty unceremonious way to not only gaslight the issues people have regarding TLOU2, but also exaggerate as being the death of the gaming medium. For my sake, I think it's unusually indicative of how a lot of once popular and beloved franchises have been damaged by this subversive take on the original, making TLOU2 the last Jedi of video games and how it retcons everything for the sake of a retcon and nothing more. But that's about the most I can say in confidence what TLOU2 will do to the gaming industry as a whole.
Proof positive that SJWs have taken over video games by erasing attractive women and replacing them with attractive women.
Disregarding the SJW hyperbole, but Jim will tiptoe around the idea that Abby is attracted by first implying that she is conventionally unattractive, and simultaneously shaming people who don't find her attractive, despite him admitting she isn't. He already flip-flopped on this issue, bringing up that comment that said he didn't find her attractive, meaning Jim knows people don't find her as such.
She is, in their perpetually self-martyring worldview, yet another example of how real gamers, straight little white boys,
Ah yes, gotta not only generalize gamers as a hobby having an issue with TLOU2, but also that they all happen to be straight white boys as well. Funny that the people who claim to be so progressive are the ones who demonize arguments based on precepts they can't control. I wonder if a black Australian frog having an issue with the game would completely destroy this implicitly racist and sexist jab you're making? But do tell me how real gamers think, since you apparently know what gamers think and what sexy is.
are being ignored in favour of the non-real gamers, anyone who isn't a straight little white boy.
Implying that there was no straight white little boy who defended TLOU2 in any capacity, or of Abby's design, and that you can't criticize Abby's design unless you're straight and white. Good to know Jim, for all talk of calling other people racist and sexist, is racist and sexist himself. Imagine if you were to say this note for note, but replace white and male to black and woman. You can't deem to be against racism only when it suits you.
In short, Abby is the final cuckening. Aerith Gaines, bro! A huge portion of the controversy is rooted in something so utterly pitifully simple.
If it's so simple, Jim, why did you have to not only demonize the audience who are making the point, but also try to paint their stance as her design being the only thing wrong with it? Why spend 23 minutes talking about it if you yourself said it's not worth your time? TLOU2 for what is the point of this video exactly on the corner.
They don't like that a non-conventionally attractive woman dared to be a playable character in a mainstream video game.
Wait, Jim, I thought she was attractive, at least according to you, which wouldn't be a good judge of character considering your taste in women. But nevertheless, of course you have to boil it down to the most basic principle of play muscular female character, conveniently ignoring, but you'll bring up later, that said female character killed a beloved character brutally and is generally a piece of shit to other people around her while trying to coax sympathy in spite of it. It's almost as vain as when Borderlands 3 tried to make me sympathize with Ava despite knowing she's a piece of shit and doesn't change from that at any point. To simplify it down to playable protagonist is you putting on blinders so you don't see the whole picture.
And that is literally it for the vast majority of them.
Literally it, Jim? Do you have a poll that shows the major issues that people have with TLOU2? Are you quite literally going to do a complete 180 on your assurance that's the only reason? Because I know you will.
Oh, they'll dress it up. The whinging little lads who are still weeks after launch.
So you recognize that people have more concerns with the game and her character beyond that, but decide that, oh, that's not what they really hate about the game. Jim, I can't take anything you say seriously because not only have you done little to prove the argument you're making, but have tried to tar and feather the opposition before even hearing them out. It's the most basic form of leading your audience I've seen yet.
Trying to invalidate Abby's existence as a character. We'll try to tell you it's not about something so surface level, but it is.
Jim, Abby is not a real person, so she doesn't have an existence to validate in the first place. Also, Jim, you're the only one reading criticism about TLOU2 on a surface level. You haven't even brought up her character or the shitty gaming practices with the launch of the game. You've done the inverse of the scientific method and made a conclusion and then seeking evidence that supports your bias. But by the fact that you can even acknowledge that people have more concerns makes what you said before retarded because you know yourself that it's not true. TLOU2 for failing to make a point.
People hate Abby because she's reasonably muscular.
Again, wrong, and I know you're wrong because you're going to prove yourself wrong here in a moment, so why try to paint the argument that people hate Abby purely for that alone?
And when I say reasonably muscular, that's the extent of it too. She is not, as some people who even like her described, super mega jacked.
Jim, it's more than that. It's that she's super jacked in a post-apocalypse setting, having gains for no other reason but out of necessity of gameplay. At least, that's the most pragmatic reason I could assume, as I don't know if they made her deliberately masculine to thwart gender roles or some other nonsense. And to kill Joel, despite the way that she does it not needing to be jacked in order to do so. In fact, Jim will use her killing Joel as a reason for why she got so buff to begin with, despite that there is nowhere in the game that proves that was the reason.
Maybe it's because I spend a lot of time working with actual professional wrestlers, but I see super jacked human frames on the regular.
Yeah, all that working out for wrestling really paid out on your body frame, did it? I mean, I can't very well say I'm a machismo, as I'm an out-of-shape little straight white boy, or that you don't hold authority over the proportions of a character based on whether you have those gains, but this is just purely anecdotal, Jim. I could just as easily say I have seen muscular women who aren't as exaggerated as Abby, and my point would be as equally as valid as yours. So what's the point exactly? Argument of authority?
And Abby, while very clearly built up,
That's a pretty modest way of putting it, seeing as you're putting direct attention to the fucking size of her forearm muscles, in contrast to your tiny head.
is nowhere near the top when it comes to getting ripped to fuck.
This is going nowhere, Jim. You're playing semantics with what is too ripped or not. Same thing with people who are rich. Say, eat the rich. It's self-defeating.
Which of course is fine, be as built up as you want to be. But the way some people talk about it, it's like they've never seen muscles before.
Again, Jim, you're not an authority on musculature, and neither am I. Her build in the context of the post-apocalypse makes nary to no sense given the means of rationing food and how she would have to have multiple nutrients beyond just eating burritos in order to maintain her build. Also, you're barking at the moon as you have no person to attack, just a straw man.
They talk about her like she's Brock fucking Lesnar, but she does put Naughty Dog's intricately animated weapon upgrade system to shame by having the sweetest guns in the game. And the gamers can't fucking handle it.
Does anyone think that this sounds slightly like projection on Jim's part, considering that he simultaneously points out how pointless of a controversy it is while also highlighting it on blast? Or that he spent the time to whinge for 23 minutes about something people can't handle, like as if he's not also guilty of being bothered by it as them. Don't worry, I don't count myself out of this, but the difference here is that I'm not going to feign my own interest in the pursuit of, again, debasing the other side.
Which is why, despite the rest of the world inevitably having moved on to the next hype-fueled AAA distraction, we still have a subset of hardcore gamer boy types who are diligently working to bust the myth that a muscular woman could be in their favourite video games.
Jim, you can't proclaim other people haven't moved on with the subject when clearly you haven't, considering the day this launched in contrast to the game launching. It reeks of more projection. But why should I be surprised that the man yelling at the mirror thinks he's yelling at the window? Also, I doubt anyone would consider TLOU2 to be their favorite video game, but again, that's just my opinion, and people are completely entitled to consider it as such.
Spoilers time for early spoilers in The Last of Us Part 2 by Naughty Dog. Published by Sony. It's not like people weren't predisposed to hating Abby as her killing of the suddenly beloved video game character of Joel was.
And successfully proved my point that the hatred of Abby wasn't just because of her muscles. From the fucking horse's mouth. But I also love how because of TLOU2 recontextualizing, poorly, that Joel is somehow a piece of shit, that Jim is now convinced that people only now like Joel despite Abby. It would be a shame if Jim didn't praise Joel's character in an article of his before TLOU2 dropped. Oh wait, he did! Even more egregious is that in Jim's video review of TLOU1, he praised the ending as perfect. Yet with TLOU2 now retconning said ending to fabricate Joel as a villain, he's not bothered in the slightest by it. In fact, now he's rewritten history to believe that Joel was never likable in the first place in order to give Abby any likability, which also contradicts his previous stance that the only thing people hate Abby for is the abs.
When news of the story leaked before launch, enough for many people to preemptively decide she was awful and refuse to ever see her perspective, which is hilarious when you consider what the game's narrative was desperately trying to do.
Yes, Jim, we know. They tried horribly to give Abby a sympathetic angle, which even doing that forsakes her acting the way that she did killing Joel in that moment as she's enjoying torturing him with impunity. It's deliberately manipulated because the developers knew preemptively people wouldn't like Abby doing that, especially within the context of how Abby and the WLF convened near Joel and Tommy in order for it to play out, which further puts attention to her comically silly design in a game demanding itself to be realistic, where it otherwise wouldn't had the setup been more delicately constructive. Of course people would be upset that Joel would die, but it's the execution that really determines whether that emotion is of tragedy or of anger for how nonsensical it all is. And Naughty Dog cut corners to kill Joel off quickly because, like you, they assume no one likes Joel. It's primarily why my reasons for not liking Maya dying isn't by the principle of her dying, but what it necessitates in the plot for a number of contrivances, while also propping up an already unlikable character to greater importance.
But anyway, Joel was a shithead and a selfish character, and he was always going to meet a violent comeuppance.
2013 Jim Sterling would like to have a word with you, and I understand the notion that a particular person can change their mind on a character. But as far as I'm aware, Jim Sterling didn't change his tune about Joel until literally now. Doing so because if he didn't, it wouldn't help facilitate his argument that the hate for Abby is unjustified. Also, Jim, is it selfish to save someone you care about even if the Fireflies may or may not have designed the cure by cutting off her head? Do you think it's a bit selfish that Abby got her WLF posse way out of home base just to kill Joel in great expense of her friends and potentially of them getting killed in the process? I doubt that you'll be consistent on the answer of both of those.
That he died horribly was a natural story beat.
Natural story beat that retcons the ending of the last game that you praised, Jim. Also, the circumstances of him dying was anything but. Joel and Tommy just so happened to come across Abby and the WLF on a patrol just as a horde of clickers came rolling in, so they could just so conveniently hole up in a lodge where Joel and Tommy would give out their names to literal strangers, while Ellie was conveniently off to another part of the world so that she couldn't intervene, saving them in time, while also being a dumbass and getting herself caught in the process. Again, the principle of it would be fine if the execution didn't require all these conveniences to match up.
I pointed this out before. That anybody felt otherwise is shocking to me.
Well, damn, Jim. I guess you're shocked at yourself by that metric, you disingenuous shithead.
There's nothing about Joel that ain't loathsome.
Okay, Jim. Keep in mind that I haven't played TLOU2, so my connection to Joel is minimal. But if you want to convince the people who ate Abby because she killed Joel is unreasonable, saying that said character was loathsome isn't the way to do it. You've rewritten your stance on Joel in order to cram an arbitrary reason to like Abby, while now bemoaning people who like Joel, which again goes against your previous stance that people disliked Abby purely out of physique.
Even his fatherly character growth is rooted, as the end of the original game demonstrates, in self-interest.
Yeah, that makes sense, Jim, which is why Ellie was there to tear away at his more cynical parts and care about someone other than himself, and why he tore through heaven and hell to save her from inevitable death, even at the cost of a cure, which, keep in mind, wouldn't be a cure-all to the apocalypse. And again, Jim, what about Abby sending the WLF to kill Joel and nothing else? Do you think that that was in Abby's own self-interest, or are we just going to conveniently forget that, like you conveniently forgot your original argument being people hated Abby for her meat shanks?
But some people treat him as if he was one of the all-time lovable protagonists.
I'm just going to let this poll here do the talking, as it's a more accurate demonstration of what gamers love compared to Jim's warped perception. Also, spite doesn't beget spite. So all your love for Abby to spite Joel doesn't override people's love for Joel to spite Abby.
Even if you disagree with my read on the character,
which many do, so why exactly you would make this argument is beyond me.
He wasn't fucking that.
Jim, you do realize that a lovable protagonist doesn't necessarily need to be a goody-goody two-shoes, right? You realize that the reason people love Walter White, Eric Cartman, Boromir, or Arthur Fleck is because their actions inform their character and vice versa? Not that we literally condone their actions and therefore love them as a result. But what am I kidding? If we were to even be remotely consistent on this, you'd hate Abby too because her killing an old man, be they Joel or anyone else, would make you not like her simply by her doing a bad thing, and not whether it informs her character, which it doesn't in the context of TLOU2.
Some even talk about him like they're mourning a loved one, like he was their own father figure, and darling, let me tell you, if you look up to Joel from The Last of Us, well, you're probably exactly the kind of person who thinks it's okay to harass and stalk and attack a voice actor for something her character did to another character.
Wow, Jim. Utterly fucking despicable. You have literally no through line to prove that people who look up to Joel would condone that harassment. Hell, I don't, and I don't even know the name of the voice actor or Joel as a character. This is on par of saying that you can't critique The Last Jedi or Rose Tico as a character because she's got presumably harassed. Like as if you can't critique a movie while also not condoning harassment of a real person. It's ironic because Jim has done nothing but assume the real life intentions of people who criticize a video game character while demeaning other people who harass real people because of a video game character. You are the pot calling the kettle black, you fucking hypocrite.
I don't give a single care about her. I just want my Joel to not be golfed to death.
You know, being me, I would actually ask them if they would be fine with Joel's death if it made more sense to try to poke their brain whether it's the principle or execution of it that bother them. But with Jim, nope. Dismiss away because it's easier to invent an enemy and shoot the messenger rather than address the argument honestly.
And if you're that abusively disconnected from reality, hey, Ubisoft's hiring.
Again, Jim, you can like Joel while also not condoning the harassment of that voice actor while also hating the character of Abby. These are not mutually exclusive beliefs, which goes to show the only person abusively disconnected from reality is you.
We already discussed in a previous video how Abby's performer, Laura Bailey, has been attacked online by weird and fucked up Last of Us fans who have maybe spent too much of their squalid, rotten lives playing violent video games and can no longer discern fiction from reality.
Jim, all your white knighting about her getting harassed doesn't defeat any criticism regarding the character. And it is white knighting because it's in service to dismiss criticisms of a given media simply because some fans took it a little too far. Also, again, love that you're now right on the Anita Sarkeesian / Jack Thompson fence of video games cause X argument to lambast TLOU fans when you could easily have just disavowed their actions or even reasoned them to merely keep the criticism purely to the quality of the voice acting and nothing more. And Jim, did you like your own fucking video? Are you that fucking egotistic that you'll arbitrarily bump up your own algorithm to further your goals? I mean, benefit of the doubt, it could be one of his producers who liked this video, which is still a conflict of one's own self-interest, ironic that, but I'm willing to believe that Jim is this bold-faced confident about his nonsense arguments.
And while some of those still negatively obsessed with Abby will tell you their hate is rooted wholly in the character's actions within The Last of Us Part 2.
So you mean to tell me that there are other reasons people hate Abby? Wow, that's interesting, because before then you said, with certainty, that the criticisms are purely about her physique and nothing more. Yet, you brought up them harassing the VA for something the character did, meaning their reasons for hating Abby go beyond that, and brought up Joel's death as a reason people who also disliked her. It's like you never had a fucking point to begin with, and wanted to be the contrarian.
Even a cursory glance at the discourse.
Jim, you've already proven to be heavily unreliable when discussing the discourse, as you already prefaced the hatred for Abby being about abs, and then, when that didn't work, tried to dismiss people's love for Joel as misplaced and malicious, and then proceeded to dismiss Abby's hate as purely spiteful, despite you being nothing but spiteful and passive-aggressive throughout. Whatever comments you bring up, I have to take with a grain of salt, because I know you will twist it in a way that fits your worldview.
Will reveal that's all complete and total bollocks for most of them.
Holy fucking crap. I've never seen a person literally contradict their own statement in such a defeated way. Like there was a gear turning in Jim's head, realizing that what he said doesn't make sense considering everything else he brought up, perfecting how Jim's argument is not even one.
Abby is not a traditionally, conventionally attractive video game character, and they despise her for it.
Contradicting yourself again? You literally went on a rant that Joel wasn't beloved because people hate Abby for killing Joel. Not even a minute earlier, so clearly it isn't simply because she's not conventionally attractive.
You don't even have to look very hard to see their real problem with her.
Of course you don't, because you'll cherry pick arguments you think are bad and make you look good, despite this tweet you're showing proving the cognitive dissonance of your previous arguments, as you complain about unrealistic female proportions in games that aren't realistic. Bayonetta, Quiet, and the Sorceress as examples, while bemoaning others critiquing female proportions of other games. You can't have it both fucking ways, Jim, but you'll certainly try.
It all comes down to the muscle.
Jim, it all comes down to the muscles. Also, Jim, people who were predisposed to hating Abby because of her killing Joel in the same fucking video. You lost, You know it isn't about the muscles, but keep running that lie till the cows come home.
At first, they tried to argue Abby wasn't a realistic portrayal of a woman simply because she was well built.
At first? You already said that people were predisposed to hating her for killing Joel, so, if anything, her physique was just another notch on this poison belt.
And rather than acknowledge the existence of people outside of their tiny idea of what people can be...
Hey Jim, while you're throwing stones in your glass house, can you remind me again what you think of people who critique Abby's physique? Oh yeah, weird and fucked up people who spent the rest of their squalid and rotten lives playing violent video games. Are you running a theater, Jim? Because you're fucking projecting.
They decided it wasn't realistic that a woman could be so stacked.
In a post-apocalypse environment centered on realism, as the spore monsters are based on a real-life disease that could potentially take control of the host. To think that a spore monster is more believable than Abby's abs should be enough for you to realize how comical it all is. Not even regarding all the other issues with the game you'll ignore up until it suits you.
When it was pointed out that yes, women can get that swole and more besides.
In a post-apocalyptic setting, Jim, emphasis on the post-apocalypse. For fuck's sake, Jim, you're the one who's disconnected fiction from reality at this point.
When it was pointed out that yes, the very woman Abby's design was based on was equally if not more muscular.
More muscular, Jim? You're being quite generous with the comparisons considering the other shots you showed where her fucking forearms exceeded the width of her head, whereas here is reasonably toned. Also, post-apocalypse. Not even once.
The outraged gamers changed their tune.
Oh, did they, Jim? Or was it that you realized that Abby's character is bad because muscles wasn't the only reason they hated her character, and now you're trying to save this sinking ship of a non-argument you've had, while also recognizing your own fucking hubris and saying it as such over and over again.
Now the popular argument persists. It's not that she can't be muscular, it's that she can't be muscular in The Last of Us Part 2.
Or how about this, Jim? People think her physique is simultaneously ridiculous and, bear with me here, and wouldn't be plausible in The Last of Us 2? Wow! Unbelievable! Who knew people could have more than one reason for not liking a character?
You see, the same group of status quo warriors who have spent years in this so-called culture war defending unrealistic body types is suddenly an arbiter of what is and isn't believable character design.
Jim, this is easily as applicable to you in the opposite manner. You've spent years derailing unrealistic body types and now suddenly became an arbiter of what is and isn't unbelievable character design. You were the one who said that Quiet's outfit is stupid and that Hideo Kojima's reason for her wearing that outfit in game wasn't justifiable enough. So don't try to prattle on to me that you have a consistent standard for what is impeccable character design.
After all the defenses of chainmail bikinis and everything Rob Liefeld did to artistic concepts of human proportion...
Yes, the shifting of the goalposts to the most extreme example, an example of which you can't find in any modern video games because none such exist, and if they did, I'm sure it would either fit with the extreme aesthetic of the game, or have an in-lore reason for it to be. But if it makes some people horny, that's fucking bad according to Jim fucking Sterling, son.
Suddenly, the question of Abby's large arms in a mushroom zombie video game have turned every 2-bit gamer with a Twitter handle into an expert nutritionist who can scientifically argue that no women could get so hard in a post-apocalypse.
Alright, Jim. Then prove that Abby's physique is believable, because all you've done so far is belittle and demonize the people making the argument, rather than the argument itself. And more importantly, you emphasizing that TLOU2 is a mushroom zombie video game, as if to say the game is not based on real life, also defeats your argument of her physique being reasonable. So again, which is it, Jim?
You see, there's no food in a zombie apocalypse, so nobody can get the nourishment they need to build up their bodies to get muscles in the first place.
You need at least 3,600 calories, as a woman, in order to begin gaining muscle, and to keep it for every pound of muscle you have. Give and take, Abby's forearms probably weigh 10 apiece, would mean she would have to intake over tens of thousands of calories in order to keep it, equivalent to a light meal by Movie Bob. Now, take that with having to feed everybody in the WLF, and ration of food evenly means that either Abby is stealing food for herself to keep her musculature, or that she's using steroids. Perfectly valid inferences as to why Abby would not, in this case, be able to stay swole.
That's logic that's suddenly been applied to a video game.
logic of which he'll use to justify Abby's physique, so don't go crying about realism in a video game when that's the thing you're asking for.
I mean, sure, she's not even that extremely muscular and has no more meat on her than many of the men.
As far as I've seen, other than Fat Gerald, no other male comes close to having as big a forearm as her, so no, wrong again, which is pretty pathetic considering that I've never played the game and know more about it than a guy who likely has. It just goes to show if you're willing to lie to your audience and to yourself that nuances like that are just tears in rain.
But we're not here to question male body types, are we?
Because men and women are biologically different, and this is just whataboutism at this point because I imagine people would still have a problem with her physique, albeit less so, if she was a man. I know that troubles you considering your stance on the trans community, but yes, men and women are physically and biologically different.
Get out of here with that commie logic.
Says the dude who complains about capitalism and then unironically begged for a Fall Guys plug in the beginning of the video and has a Patreon. Capitalism is so fucking effective of a system that even the people who hate it use it to benefit themselves.
And sure, we could say that in a game about mushroom zombies, the size of a character's arms aren't the biggest suspension of disbelief out there.
So why even try to rationalize her figure, Jim? Why complain that people find it to be unrealistic and then proceed to make reasons for why it could be believable? What's the point, Jim?
What do you want?
It's not that simple.
What do you want?
But that kind of Bolshevism isn't going to get those cocks jerking, is it?
I also find it interesting how not once Jim ever mentions Ellie's presence in the game, which would defeat this other argument he's making about how we can't play a character unless said character is fappable, despite Ellie being modestly female without the aforementioned anchor arms getting in the way of things. Also, another bit of projection there.
And sure, there are supplement pills found in every drawer and cupboard that the protagonists chow down without hesitation.
Jim, what about Ellie then? Why isn't she sculpted like an Adonis then? Is it because you couldn't be that buff in the post-apocalypse? I know! Hot fucking take!
But that's just video game logic.
Logic you use to justify Abby's realism. Wait, what was your argument again? That it's okay for her to be unrealistic or that she's realistic and we're just a bunch of fucking wankers?
And we shouldn't be looking for too much realism in a game?
Yet you will literally point out examples where the game devs tried to give explanations for why she's buff and simultaneously demean unrealistic body proportions in other games. Do please keep nailing yourself to the cross.
Any reasonable person would be able to say, shut up, it's a video game, the reasonably muscular arms are among the more believable suspensions of disbelief in a mushroom zombie video game.
But you're not a reasonable person, Jim. Oh no. Wait till we get a lot of this.
And that's even if you think it's unrealistic in the first place.
Verisimilitude, my good Jim Sterling. It's what makes respawning and perfect reloads acceptable in a game, but disabled female soldiers in World War II not.
But that doesn't do enough to counteract the sheer hypocritical stupidity of a group of literal wankers who only ever shout realism when it's convenient, when they're trying to get an unconventional video game protagonist erased.
Again, equally applies to you, as in this very video you'll be making arguments for realism regarding her physique when it wasn't applicable for you to call out realism regarding any other female character's design. So, thanks for letting us know what you really think underneath the patronizing.
Or falsely claiming that black people weren't around in the olden days, which is why games set in medieval Europe should only have white characters.
Wow, what a derailment of the original point. Would you prefer medieval Europe to be set in feudal Japan with a bunch of black women fighting velociraptors on tricycles? Of course you wouldn't, Jim, because it wouldn't fit the time frame or theme, just like it wouldn't be uncouth for a movie, say Django Unchained, not to depict slavery during the Civil War era, or a World War II game not to depict the Nazis even if we have to remind ourselves that those exist. Also, Jim, if it's just a video game, then why not have only white people in medieval Europe? It's just a video game apparently, so that means you can get away with any nonsense you want apparently, especially if it suits you. So why the acrimony over Mordhau?
What makes this situation so absolutely absurd is not just the fact that it's a mushroom zombie game, and a pair of above-average biceps are the least of the fiction. It's that even within the world of The Last of Us Part 2, Naughty Dog went out of its way to show that Abby actually does have access to regular meals and a fitness regimen.
See what I mean? He literally made the previous argument that we should suspend our disbelief when it comes to biceps in a zombie mushroom video game, then proceeds to make arguments for why her arms are realistic. He's flip-flopped so fucking hard on his stance that I wouldn't be surprised if he was related to Mitt Romney.
Narratively, of course, the game establishes that Abby spent the past few years specifically training herself physically for the task of wreaking revenge on Joel.
Is that true, though? Because I recall, again, according to Mahler and Rags, that Abby had that workout regimen irrelevant to her interest in killing Joel. More importantly, you don't need to be buff in order to fuck up someone with a golf club. Take the infamous Andrew Ryan scene in Bioshock 1 as a notable example of what you can do to someone with it, as it's basically a ball of iron metal on a pretty sturdy pole. The amount of force you'd be exerting in that golf club is almost equivalent to striking something with a sledgehammer. More importantly, when you play as Abby, very little of the game centers on her resentment of Joel up until the pivotal moment where they enact the deed. So it's like the developers knowingly segregated those two aspects of Abby because there would be no way they could make her sympathetic.
On top of that, we see very early in the game that the settlement Abby lives in has a fully functional agricultural system. You know, farms and shit.
I mean, it would only be functional if it necessitated a function in of itself in the game. As for it being there, it's just window dressing for how the settlement even has food to begin with. More importantly, keep in mind, in the post-apocalypse, you have to evenly distribute and ration food so that there isn't a sudden shortage if and when the need arrives. So that means that whatever food Abby is given would be proportionate to everyone else, meaning she would not be able to maintain her body.
She's eating fucking burritos partway through the game, just after asking what's for lunch to indicate that they have, if not a fully balanced diet, then certainly a diverse enough one to where they're eating different stuff.
Burritos are mostly made up of beans and flour, so she would be only gaining a disproportionate amount of protein, which isn't enough for her to maintain her stature, especially in the confines of the post-apocalypse.
On top of all that, Abby's role in the settlement is a physical one. She goes out, patrols, hunts, fights, her entire job is physical.
Wow, you're really reaching for any reason she would have that physique, are you? Okay then, why isn't Ellie, Dina, Tommy, or Jesse as jacked as her, despite all of them going out on regular patrols too? If anything, all that physical exertion only proves that Abby would not be able to maintain her physique if she is not regularly at WLF headquarters.
And even if that's not enough to 100% explain how muscular she is, it's still more explanation than any other video game gives for any other body type in any other fucking video game.
Wow, Jim. It's like you've entirely missed the point of that last Twitter comment you decided was dumb and how TLOU2 centers on realism, whereas Gears of War does not. And while we're at it, I distinctly remember people making fun of the proportions in Gears of War, including Nazi, a passing acquaintance of yours, who many respect to this day, who agree. Even with that in mind, look at the body type. The majority of their size is coming from the armor itself, not the physique within it. But even so, I will concede that it's goofy even if Gears of War doesn't strive for realism, unlike Last of Us 2. This is such a false equivalence, Jim.
Game, and it's still just a fucking video game.
Yep, it's just a fucking video game, Jim, which is why you put the effort to point out numerous examples of how Abby could plausibly have her physique, while also saying that we should suspend our disbelief, because for you play to whatever argument suits you.
And The Last of Us Part 2 did so much visual and literary legwork here that disbelief should be more than fully suspendable unless you're actively trying to be upset, which, let's be honest, is what the people still performing their crusade for realism are.
Of course, Jim, you wouldn't have it any other way with this convenient straw man you've defeated, victorious amongst an empty crowd of platitudes. Yeah, people were trying to be upset at Abby killing Joel. No one is genuinely upset at Abby for any tangible reason, except when you say they are, and then you can turn around and demonize them for that too, as well as invalidate their reasons for hating Abby for nothing else but her abs, except when they say that, they don't as well, and you proceed to also invalidate too. I'm glad Jim is here to tell me what thoughts I have in my brain before I've had them. What a fucking psychologist you are.
I mean, how else do you explain this almost deliciously audacious stretch where one highly educated doctor found Abby's in-game workout schedule and used it as proof that Abby shouldn't exist?
What? Jim, are you fucking kidding me? You literally pointed out the schedule as proof that her physique is realistic, and now, when someone uses that same evidence to point out the contrary, now it's wrong? Holy fucking shit, Jim. Never before have I seen a man use his own evidence against his own failing argument. I mean, it's absolutely amazing the fucking hoops you're jumping just to argue against the opposition arbitrarily.
The schedule, by the way, is not a major plot point or anything.
You pointed it out as proof that Abby could have her muscles. What the fuck? Did you forget the last 20 seconds of your argument for realism while also denouncing people for wanting realism? Also, you yourself praised Naughty Dog for putting in that detail, so obviously they wanted you to see it, right? So that you could point out that Abby is realistic yet gets salty when someone else does it to prove the opposite?
It's not anything. It's a background asset, something cobbled together for the scenery like background assets are, and it was by no means intended to be paid attention to.
But you did, Jim, and you used it to make your argument for why Abby is reasonably muscular. Am I talking to two different Jim Sterlings right now? Because that's what it fucking feels like.
But wankless wonders, starved for anything vaguely resembling a bullet for their logic gun.
Keep in mind that because Jim pointed out the schedule to suit his argument, that by proxy, he's calling himself a wankerless wonder, proving that he's just fucking projecting hardcore.
People who must have been scouring the game for weeks trying to find anything to back up their laughable anger.
Honestly, at this point, I just want to quote Jim's own lines in the same video and then put this line as a response to show he's fucking arguing with himself.
Have leapt on this throwaway meaningless asset as if it's pure argumentative dynamite.
The same throwaway asset that you use to make your argument and then proceed to disassociate it when it didn't bear out proof for a physique. Keep arguing with yourself.
The image shows she does not work on her arms to the capacity an average woman would need to. Thursdays, 4 times every 2 months. Additionally, food is rationed.
Also, Jim, Naughty Dog went out of its way to show that Abby actually does have access to regular meals and a fitness regimen to prove her stature, and now has completely double backed on that defense to now make the argument that games shouldn't be real, despite him clearly making objective arguments for why she is realistic. This is your fucking brain on ideology.
That's where we are with this shit.
Yeah, Jim, really sucks when you can't make a point, refuse to stay on a point, and proceed to jump between two poles of an argument. Also, if the person he is mocking really is a doctor, and Jim was trying to reinforce his arguments based on his experience, why is now invalidating the credence of a doctor's input? Would it be that again makes his argument, whatever the fuck it used to be, moot?
Some boys out there are so eager, so frothingly, gleefully eager to invalidate the existence of even a fictional woman.
Again with this shit? You can't invalidate something that isn't real to begin with, Jim. And more importantly, questioning the physique or design of a character isn't invalidating their right to exist. It's as malicious as when someone questions someone's trans identity being equivocated to erasing their existence as a trans person, which, if merely someone questioning your belief makes you doubt it, probably wasn't an informed belief to begin with.
That they're hunting down background images and zooming in and enhancing them like they're in a Tom Clancy fucking book.
It's not even within the world of The Last of Us Part 2. Naughty Dog went out of its way to show that Abby actually does have access to regular meals and a fitness regimen.
People who must have been scouring the game for weeks trying to find anything to back up their laughable anger.
And all because, despite their sudden and convenient interest in realism,
Really says a lot about you, since you conveniently cared about realism when it suited you.
a group of gamers don't find this girl as attractive as other fictional girls.
It's not even attraction based on physique that makes her unattractive, Jim. Or are we just going to pad the "you hate her because she's ugly" straw man again, despite you clearly trying to refute arguments based on her actions as a character and spiting Joel in the process?
Some have suggested that these particular gamer boy types get violently distressed if they encounter someone they don't want to masturbate to.
Jim, you might as well work at the National Enquirer with all these Weezer words and Ghostman inferences you're making, because you have no citation, source, or person to base any of these statements on other than your perception that it has to be the case, which again is a projection. I'm sorry if Abby doesn't get your dick hard, Jim. That's not the gamer's fault for pointing it out. Also, again, what about Ellie?
And that indeed
Pumping out a fat load.
is what this is all about.
Again, no, it is by your own admission, as you've gone on time and time again about her killing Joel as the reason you don't like her. Must I play the clip again?
It's not like people weren't predisposed to hating Abby as her killing of the suddenly beloved video game character of Joel was.
And I'm not saying that's definitely what's going on.
So why even apply it is, Jim? You've made countless implicit statements that all the acrimony for Abby is because she isn't conventionally hot. But of course, you think saying, well, I'm not saying definitively the case, means that's an out for you to claim that you never made that your argument. Which, if it is, Jim, then why try to bring up how plausibly realistic she is, or her actions killing Joel is justified? Do you even read the words that you're frothing from your fucking empty head?
But anyway, here's a couple quotes about Abby we found with minimal effort on The Last of Us' subreddit.
Oh boy, more cherry-picked comments that I no doubt were totally 100% serious and not in jest, as you can't take much of what you see on the internet seriously. Case in point, OK Ham symbol being a white power symbol.
If there's no Rule 34 of Abby, does that mean she doesn't exist? No one will make lewds of her.
So, wait, is it okay to loot Abby or not, Jim? I thought your problem was that people didn't find her attractive or bothered that she wasn't conventionally attractive, and now are upset people can't masturbate to her? But wouldn't that objectify the fictional character in your mind? How do leftist rules work again? Also, good job taking the joke seriously, joke police.
There is R34 of her in the fucking game itself. Let's not talk about that scene.
Actually, let's, at least to once again makes Jim's already empty argument more worthless. So usually a sex scene should at least elucidate a development in a relationship between two people, possibly at odds or at least warming up to each other. But here, it's just that. A sex scene between two people already in a relationship with each other. So with that in mind, there was clearly an attempt by the developers to make Abby approachable in regards to attractiveness. And now that people are disgusted by her, Jim, presumably, is upset and is trying to die on the hill that gamers can't see themselves playing a character they can't fuck. So does that mean that Jim would prefer if Abby was super hot but still did all the horrible things that she does? Or that her being unattractive means that all other logic can be thrown out the window? Because if you ask me, that's even more of a sign of Jim's growing cognitive dissonance, as he's quite literally devalued a fictional woman's impact in a game based solely on how attractive they are. The irony just keeps piling up.
If I was drunk enough, I'd not do it. I'm sure people with muscle fetishes would be very happy.
Again, another joke that Jim is just seething because he has to find any way to paint his opposition poorly, even if said opposition is having a gaffe at his expense. What a pathetic, judgmental bastard you become, Jim. I used to like your work, and was willing to forgive even your most ideologically extreme of takes at the time, but you've just become increasingly dismissive, out of touch, entitled, and patronizing the farther down you've gone. This has to be the worst video that I've ever seen you dole out. Even worse than the DOA 3 vid, even worse than the objective review video.
I wonder what Rule 34 will do with Abby. I have my eye bleach ready.
Couldn't be any worse than what we see in game, right? See, I got my own jokes.
This is no Pornhub. We don't post sex.
Yes, of course, there's a transphobic slur tossed in there, because Abby has muscles, you see. And no muscle girl be allowed in-game for real big grown-up man.
What slur is it, Jim? I have no context for what they are implying Abby to be. Also, again, this is assuming you take the person 100% seriously and not note that so far all the comments you point out are clearly in jest.
The very fact Abby isn't skinny and or curvy automatically made her a man in some people's heads.
Jim, the fact that you can acknowledge that people were confused as to her gender should tell you enough the issues with her character design. And more importantly, as far as I'm aware, Abby does not describe herself as transgender in the game either. But don't let that stop trans trenders from adopting any vaguely agender characters being trans, like with Astolfo or fucking Sylveon, for crying out loud.
And while I don't like to churlishly throw around people's dating success or lack thereof,
I mean, you've already demonized people criticizing Abby as having a life, so this wouldn't be far from the porch you stand on, which, if you're going to be upset about transphobic slurs, doesn't really give you leniency when you call people wankers or little white boys. Just saying.
I genuinely wonder what some of these people think actual women look like.
If you're going to tell me that Abby is a depiction of actual women, then boy, I don't want to live where you are where that's the case. But again, Jim is the master authority of what women look like. For he alone knows everything, and anyone else who disagrees, well, they're just weird and fucked up straight little white boys who just want to wink. Pride often falls first during the fall, Jim.
Because some people do look like the people they find attractive, but
no buts, Jim, at least not on Abby, because now you have to answer for why people can reasonably look like Tifa Lockhart or Quiet despite you bickering about their design being unrealistic. Come on, I'm waiting for you to once again trip up on your already inconsistent talking points.
That's only a percentage of the makeup of the human range of body types. I mean, look at the extreme example I set.
Well, Jim, generally women aren't going to look like Abby, on the grand scale more likely than they would look like her. I just find it funny that Jim of all people is going to argue nuances and individual perspective when he's done nothing but generalize and make intentional vaguities to service his point.
But some gamers out there seem to believe that women can only look and, let's be honest, behave one way.
Considering you've not once presented an example where someone demanded Abby act a certain way, I'm going to assume it's you, again projecting your own desires for women to act a certain way according to your interests. But a projection does not paint a man projected onto a sinner, only a spectator blamed. So by this logic, Jim thinks all of you, watching right now, even the audience, who has even the faintest, vaguest interest in playing games, a sexist. Good job, Jim. You really know how to captivate an audience while talking down to them.
And when you see him clutching pearls over Tifa's breast size being altered in Final Fantasy VII Remake...
Well, Jim, that would be more of an argument of transformative work, as obviously they would want to keep the characters in line with their original depiction. As for Tifa, I honestly don't think her breast size was reduced, more that in order for the game to inform the player that Tifa was a female, that they had to add polygonal triangles to her chest with the limited technology they had, making her seem much more perky than she actually is. I mean, forgive me if I'm wrong, I don't really know much about Final Fantasy VII, and likely the cutscenes had a much different interpretation of her breast size. But it's again a false equivalence at the end of the day, because you're comparing a remake of an older work with people complaining about Abby's physique in her first appearance in the series.
Or screaming furious vengeance because a drawing of a girl's panties aren't as visible on American game packaging as it is in Japan.
Jim, surely you, being a proponent against censorship, at least when it suits you, that you should be barred with any kind of censorship, even if minor or for the discretion of getting a wank off. Imagine if Naughty Dog decided next week to delete the sex scene between Owen and Abby. I imagine that while a lot of people would be spared the nightmare of watching that, many others would still be barred by the principle of them censoring it itself. Come to think of it, Jim, don't you find it ironic that a game published by Sony, who have made a campaign against anime titties, would have this uncut, unedited, fully cinematic sex scene in plain view? Wouldn't that make you think this argument for censorship is purely selective in nature and should be dismissed wholesale?
It's difficult not to assume that these poor miscreants must be so utterly, crushingly desperate for an actual range of human interaction, or at least in need of something different to jerk off to.
The same parable, assuming the intentions of people who criticize something with no basis, making yourself the person who is guilty of the things you assume others to be. Sorry that your wife isn't giving you a wank, Jim. Maybe her boyfriend could help. See, I can do it too, but unlike Jim, I'm not generalizing an entire group, only one person.
Not necessarily better stuff, just more varied stuff. More than just Rule 34. There's so much more stuff to look at when you're pounding it.
So you want Abby to be looted in spite of her being admittedly conventionally non-attracted by your own measure? Or is that problematic? Or is that what you want? What do you want, Jim? Please stay on point.
Just where were all these people when Gears of War gave us men who were 90% pure grade A beef fortress after a 14-year-long war that devastated the planet's resources and decimated the population?
Whataboutism again. Also, they never left, Jim. Many people, including myself, thought their designs was goofy, but the thing was, it was consistently goofy given the Locusts were also super beefcakes in their own right. Only until Gears 4 and 5 did they tone down their physique while keeping the armor at least relatively measured, acknowledging the fact that it did look goofy at the time.
Where the fuck were they during the release of Borderlands, and Borderlands 2, and Borderlands the pre-sequel, and Tales from the Borderlands, and Borderlands 3, where all the starved inhabitants of a dead desert world make Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson look like this prick?
Ooh, Jim, of all the game you chose was Borderlands? What a shame that in Borderlands 3 there's a character named Amara who, get this, is reasonably muscular and manages to keep her femininity, defeating your entire argument that Abby is somehow reasonably muscular and that people hate muscular women. Amazing, but that's not even considering the fact that Borderlands is super stylized and cel-shaded to look like it's popping off a comic book. So you wondering why people didn't complain about realism in Borderlands is you again making a false equivalence to a game that strived for realism. No one had any expectation that Borderlands would be based on real life, whereas TLOU2 did. And even so, Borderlands still has to follow the rules that it makes and lore that it builds, just like TLOU2, which Borderlands 3 and TLOU2 don't. But holy shit, Jim, you actually forced me to defend an aspect of Borderlands 3 because of how absolutely dogshit disingenuous you are right now. Right after me tearing that story to pieces. Good job!
Hell, where were all these people telling Lord Humongous that he was just too fucking ripped?
Again, stylized post-apocalypse, and Lord Humongous isn't even muscular as he is large in stature, hence the fucking name. Barring the whataboutism presented, what about Mean Girls? All the actors were in their teens, yet people were willing to suspend their disbelief that they aren't. So what about that, huh? Which is the problem with making a what about argument. You point to one thing proving an inconsistency, I point to another proving the contrary, and we keep doing it until there is no comparisons left.
You know, I'm racking my brain trying to think of the last time anyone had an issue with muscles being in a video game, and nothing springs to mind.
I thought the issue with Zarya was more to do with the pink hair and not her muscles, as her wielding a fucking Tesla cannon and being in the Russian military would necessitate the need for exercise. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure some probably did have an issue with it, but with Jim being so casually dismissive of the other side, I can't believe his account on anything. Also, Amara as a muscular character exists that people like from a game that came out a year ago, and Overwatch isn't meant to be as realistic as TLOU2.
That's the thing. As a dude, I actually fell into this trap a little bit, writes Forbes' Paul Tassi in an article that gets to the meat of the matter.
This next segment of Gems is where they'll take a person's quote who was originally skeptical of design and through guilt-tripping his own skepticism decides to emasculate his thoughts as being wrong or problematic. If you have to preface your take by saying, as a dude, like as if you couldn't have just had that thought regardless of gender or race, makes you fucking weak and incapable of being honest with yourself. Exhibit A, Jim Sterling, who you'd think would take issue with Paul mentioning the schedule since he pointed out to prove that Abby's muscles are reasonable, but he's conveniently forgotten he made that point just to pwn the gamers. Trademark.
Not like in an angry way, but I did keep waiting for some sort of story explanation as to why Abby had gotten so jacked.
On top of all the other potential story explanations for why characters were acting not unlike they should given the context, but apparently thinking about her physique angrily is the default to him.
But it was never directly addressed outside of one line about how she had just lifted a certain weight for the first time.
And don't you think that at the time this person saw this, that it wasn't a perfectly reasonable explanation as to why Abby couldn't be bulked up? Or that her being bulked up was an afterthought to enhance the gameplay?
But then when I stopped and thought about it, I realised when had I ever asked that question about a male character, or needed an explanation as to why they were unrealistically jacked, way more unrealistically than Abby usually.
Not likely, because men and women are biologically different. Difference. Do you feel me? But oh, we live in a world where they are quite literally the same, except men are just despicable, evil little straight white boys who want to invalidate fictional characters when it suits you. Jesus Christ. Also, I love to poke him some specific examples and then tell him exactly why that wouldn't be the case, like you bringing up Gears of War and Borderlands 3 when neither of which are equivalent to TLOU2.
Never. It's just assumed as video game default that men are jacked with huge muscles, and if women are muscular, they are also skinny.
For the last time, because men are biologically, physically stronger than women, by objective fact. Doesn't mean it's therefore wrong for a woman to be stronger than a given man, if it's that it's very unlikely you would have a woman be as jacked in the forums as Abby in a post-apocalypse, taking into account realism.
And yet it's perfectly reasonable to think that a woman living in the post-apocalypse on a mission of revenge would indeed get super jacked to be able to take on zombie hordes and enemy soldiers alike.
Ellie. What about Ellie then? She went on her crusade and not once got jacked to begin with, nor how Abby killing Jordan ever necessitated her needing to get jacked unless she planned on popping his head with her arms, which she probably could, given their fucking size.
There really isn't any explanation past that needed.
So don't ask questions is the mantra of TLOU2, right? Interesting you say that, since you felt the need to explain how Abby could be jacked, albeit poorly, but nevertheless felt that you should despite your insistence to use this quote to your advantage, when it evidently derails the original point you're making. whatever the hell it is now.
Once I saw a social media movement of other muscular women showing off their arms that looked close to identical to Abby's,
Postapocallypse. What does that spell? Apparently nothing to Jim or Paul, since neither want to acknowledge that factor into the mix. Also, I thought we were against the idea of applying realism in our mushroom zombie game. Oh wait, I thought that we were afraid of muscular women despite Amara existing. Oh wait, I thought we wanted to get our rocks off despite no one wanting to loot Ellie in the same fucking game.
I realised I was being dumb for even thinking about this as a story point that needed to be addressed.
And in a roundabout way insults Jim as being dumb for bringing it up himself, so kudos.
No, I wasn't vocally mad about it online, and yet my own bias has made me internally question whether Abby's appearance was right. That was stupid.
Self-doubt and second-guessing your own thoughts on the matter is always the key to putting yourself in a mental prison, where you never know if you adopted the wrong thought or feeling intentionally or otherwise. Also, again, with this idea that you had to be mad in order to question it, and not just cordial or remotely pragmatic about it, I guess both you and Paul want to smear those question it as being villainous in the first place, which is of no surprise.
Yep, he's correct.
And by Jim saying he's correct, he's also calling himself wrong. But hey, benefit of the doubt, maybe Jim just has an extremely selective and convenient case of Alzheimer's.
It is stupid, because no matter who you are watching this right now, you can claim that you'd have been just as skeptical if Abby were a man, but the fact is you wouldn't be, because you haven't been.
Jim, if I literally pull up an example of someone saying the thing you claim people wouldn't say, this defeats your idea that people wouldn't question it if Abby were a man. Granted, less people would be less skeptical of the physique on a man, because unlike you who thinks a woman can compete at the same level of a man and vice versa, men are different biologically. Unless you mean to shame people who recognize the biological differences on this idea, people will believe a woman couldn't be as built as Ronda Rousey, for instance, is absurd, because by that logic, I and many others should be able to shame someone like Jesse for not being a typical man. Retard.
You've had chances before now to show that skepticism, my friend, in many, many post-apocalyptic worlds full of dieseled men, and only now, only with Abby, do people suddenly care.
Don't patronize me like as if you even know my arguments or like you've even been arguing against anyone. You would get absolutely fucking wrecked in the debate regarding this, which is why it's easier for you to snipe in this contemptuous way that you are. My door is always open, Jimbo.
People who, until now, were among the most likely to excuse a game's shittiness by claiming it's just a game.
Jim, you literally made that same argument to dismiss people's hatred for Abby as a character as her being fictional and in a game, while also saying that people are invalidating said fictional character for questioning it. You got no leg to stand on, you got nothing. More importantly, if TLOU2 was absolutely perfect in every way borrowing Abby's design, guess what? People would be a lot more forgiving of the design choice, as it ultimately wouldn't have gone in the way of all the other qualities. Examples like this is an error in the Lord of the Rings, where you can visibly see a car in the Shire, or during Joker when Arthur shoots 8 rounds in a 5 to 6 chamber revolver without reloading. Both are indeed issues with those respective movies, but considering everything else surrounding it being excellent, are forgivable. With TLOU2 being as bad as it is, Abby's design is further soured as a result, like a dead baby in a war-torn battlefield filled with dead bodies.
Well, shut the fuck up, kids, because The Last of Us 2 is just a game.
Hey Jim, A Simulator is just a game. Why are you getting so angry, huh? Every game peddled out by Digital Homicide are just games, so why are you so angry? Why do you care if Mordhau or Kingdom Come don't have black people in it? It's just a game, after all. Just so fucking dismissive of you.
Not even a particularly great one. I mean, it's good, it's fun, it's a fun zombie game, but it's just a fun zombie game.
That's putting it lightly, but you're entitled to your wrong opinion, as are all opinions, whether you think they should have them or not.
I'm being very insulting today.
Yeah, you certainly are, which makes me wonder how you think this would sit well with those who generally have issues with Abby's design, especially if you're trying to convince them to your side of the argument. Unless you think there is no argument, which means you wasted your fucking time even making this video to begin with.
And that's in part because trying to debate this issue on the facts is relatively pointless.
Which is why you spent 23 minutes trying to debase this issue. What an absolutely worthless, contradictory sentiment, Jim. Thanks for wasting 200,000 people's time.
The fact is, Abby exists. Whether it's believable or not, she's got big arms in a mushroom zombie video game.
Okay, Jim, let's take this shitty argument you're making to the nth degree. So let's say Last of Us 3 drops and Naughty Dog decides to throw all caution out the window, give people telekinesis, alien guns, set it on Mars with a ninja unicorn as the main character. They exist, Jim. So why question their existence, you fucking bigot? Oh wait, you would, because it would undo what we understood about The Last of Us cohesively and narratively, which is why you saying character exists adds nothing to the discussion.
And she's not going to disappear if you somehow prove she couldn't exist in The Last of Us 2's world.
Well, apparently you think it is possible, since you literally stated people were invalidating the existence of a fictional character, like as if that's possible, so apparently people can do that. Also, if they can prove she isn't muscular, which isn't the same as saying she can't exist, but that's just another leap of yours, means you trying to say she could be is you again being the contrarian.
She does, whether you like it or not.
I'm going to kill your beloved character and you gotta deal with it!
Finding a workout regimen that was never intended to be so much as thought about for more than a second will not resurrect your precious beloved Joel.
Jim, if it wasn't ever intended to be seen, why would they put it there to begin with? Unless it was literally cut assets found in the game files that people found, you would have something. But to state that a game developer had no intention to put a game asset that you pointed out yourself to make your argument Abby can be muscular in the game means developers just throw shit on the wall like confetti for the hell of it, which honestly would accurately describe the design process of TLOU2.
The Last of Us 2 came out ages ago, sold a shit ton, and you can't change that. None of us can change it.
Ah, the classic, it made money, so it must be good. Yeah, I remember how that argument worked so well for making Suicide Squad, Transformers, The Room, Mortal Kombat, and Captain Marvel somehow cinematic masterpieces because money is all that matters. Here's an article proving the opposite of your already bad faith argument.
I know your experience in erasing black people from European history has allowed you to believe you can alter the past, but you actually can't.
Whoa, Jim, now you've gone completely off the fucking rails here. Who the fuck is erasing black people from history? How is merely questioning the design of a female character even lead into wanting to erase black people from history? Also, I thought we couldn't make people disappear just because we think their design is nonsensical, Jim. But now we can? As for history, you're the only one who has altered the past by turning on your love of Joel just to spite people who hated him being killed by Abby, while also being unconcerned about how TLOU2 undoes the ending of said game's history. Your house of cards is falling apart the more you think throwing them at people will kill them.
What's past is prologue, folks.
And apparently what's past is problematic too, which is why people want to alter history because of how mean it is. So maybe if you're apparently so concerned about the past being erased, that you direct that concern to the right people.
Abby happened whether you like it or not, and it's time to move on.
The blind man says, calling me blind.
And I'm simply not going to pretend there's an actual valid reason for disliking Abby's existence.
I mean, I already knew that, yet you certainly felt inclined to rattlesnake between whether people hated her for her abs or for killing Joel. So you were just as much in on the pretense as you claim others are, shattering the glass mirror only to hurt yourself in the process.
Dislike the character, dislike the story.
Well, apparently we can't dislike the characters since you've tried to downplay and simplify the dislike to one thing, and then when it was inconvenient for you double back to another tangent about how people just wanted to jack off to her, or that criticism of TLOU2 isn't allowed because someone got harassed.
But when you're debating that the character can't exist, especially when she's not even in the top 10 least believable aspects of the game, I'm gonna side-eye you.
Can you stop emphasizing that people who have issue with her design want her erased? It's again very disingenuous to paint people who merely question the design as them also saying she shouldn't exist as one. If they felt the need to have her in the story, there could have been a number of ways to put her in that was more believable. There isn't this red pill, blue pill option that we either have to have an unrealistically jacked man-woman or that Abby can't exist at all. It's not that fucking black and white, Jim.
You're trying to say women with certain body types shouldn't be in games.
A statement I haven't said and no one ever said, even with the cherry-picked examples you've made.
That women with only one or two particular body types should be. And the hateful comments, sexually sneering attitudes, and clinging desperation to scrub out Abby's entire presence betrays that motive far greater than you think any video game has betrayed you because it had a woman with muscles or pink hair.
I'm confused. I thought we gamers couldn't erase the existence of women in games because they are there, but now we can, or that it's a fruitless pursuit? Also, Jim, you were the one insinuating that people should be attracted to Abby, or at least not disgusted by her presence. So, if anything, you were the one sexually suggesting her to be, and even the fucking game insinuated that with the fucking sex scene. Also, I thought people were only ass mad about Zarya's muscles, implied by you. Now you know it's more than that? Where did the logic go in your brain?
I realise I've been more than a little antagonistic with today's video.
A sentiment that will not win you any new converts, only rile your current ones.
And some people would argue you shouldn't be antagonistic, you'll only rile them up.
Point proven! Hello, Jim. Nice to meet ya. But yes, ideally, if you want to change people's minds, even if the arguments they are making are bad, you try to reason with them. Be persuasive in your arguments. If, for example, I want to convince flat earthers that the earth is round, I wouldn't try to attack them for having that belief in the first place, and rather use what I know about how the earth is round to prove it. Sure, some will still not be convinced even if I lay out the arguments in the fullest to my ability, but those words will resonate a lot more because they were coming from a place of earnest rather than, "You're a fucking idiot shithead for believing the earth is flat." All that does is further embolden their beliefs to be true, which defeats what you're going to say next.
But what are the other options when you're as exhausted as I am, you know?
Well, there's not trying to reason with someone who rather doesn't want to be reasoned with, ignore them, or what you did, completely demonize the opposition for having your argument in the first place, which was by far the worst. Even playing to your principles, I'd rather you just not have made this video in the first place, if even you admit it's not worth your time debating it, or not worth debating, because now it makes you dishonest in having gone out of your way to bring it up.
You could ignore them, that's not very good.
Still a hell of a lot better than what you did, Jim. Still, so much better.
You could try and debate their points as if they have merit, but they don't.
And here lies the crux of the issue, Jim. You're convinced that you are right, and they are wrong based on nothing, not realizing that those people likely also believe that they are right, and that you are wrong based on nothing. It goes nowhere, Jim. If you can't convince people to your side and go for the tar and feathering, smearing and gaslighting, it only shows weakness in your own ability to make said argument you've convinced you're right about. And if you have spent this much time trying to convince people to that side, even with the patronizing and insults, then surely there is a kernel of truth in the idea that you can debate people and win them over to your side. But knowing you and your attitude, Jim, you don't want to educate or convince others. You want to preach. Be believed by proxy of the chip on your shoulder and the notch in your cap. You've built such a bubble-wrapped ivory tower for yourself that to even think someone beneath you could undermine or question your authority is a laughable suggestion. No one is infallible, Jim. Not even I. I've had my own shortcomings that I must acknowledge, and even a part of you, stuffed under the pretense, knows you've made your own bevy of mistakes, surely.
And what can I tell you? I am an open pansexual queer whose relationship with their gender, especially recently, has been a little... Ugh. He's right, you know. This is as manly as it gets around here.
So the straw man caricature of Jim, who is himself, agrees with himself? As I said, preaching to the choir. But what if this tangent about him being multiple mental diseases to chase for clout like all the trans trenders do? Well, let's find out.
And I've gotten very fucking used to spending a large portion of my life being told I literally don't exist.
Because people called you a he when you never had an inkling in your brain that you could not be a he? Because if it's so easy to tear you down by the things you attach yourself to, that only shows you have no confidence in the things you believe. Which is why you seem so fragile and broken on the inside, despite how much of a hardened exterior you've tried to build yourself around.
By the media, by people in my life. And I've got friends who are being, just having their very human rights debated by TERFs.
And we all know how debates are gay, don't we, knobs? I mean, Jim. Also, Jim, I take it a stretch that it's a human right to force people to believe in the same nonsense that you do, like saying that a church pastor can't propagandize a young infant to Christianity is a attack on his human rights. There's no human rights law in the books that people have to believe the made-up pronouns you assign yourself to, and there shouldn't be. Because if we're going to be totally consistent about this, you've straight up misgendered the people who have an issue with Abby's character design in this very fucking video.
Galvanised as they are by the likes of Graham Linehan and J.K. Rowling, who is a TERF, by the way.
Who cares if she is or isn't? It's like you're comparing her to a fucking Nazi, which she isn't, and even I have my issues with her retconning aspects in the Harry Potter novels just to get some brownie points. But what, pray tell, is the point of bringing any of this up in regards to a fictional character's design?
By the way, I do understand that I've offended some viewers in the past by saying that J.K. Rowling is a TERF.
So, is this you groveling trying to appease that tiny minority, or do you recognize that people will get offended by anything and that you should really take it with a grain of salt? What's the mentality here, Jim? Get bothered with people denying the existence of trans people, or just not care about what other people think?
I'm just very tired of seeing the right to be different debated.
Holy shit, Jim. Abby is not a real person for the last fucking time. No one is taking her ability to be fucking weird in design, as you stated yourself earlier, and more importantly, apparently, the right to be different when it comes to an opinion you disagree with should be debated, so good job face planting yourself there.
You know, it's very tiresome to see even fictional people's existences disputed.
Again, with the leaps and bounds of logic, to question a character's design, like questioning a person's pronouns, is not a denial of one's own existence. If I decide to question the motives of the Taliban, is that me denying their existence? Of course not. But you're going to go there trying to loosely make this connection between being a fictional character with a questionable design choice with questioning whether you're human or not.
When she's there in the video game, does it not make sense in the universe for that character to have those muscles? Well, it makes sense in that universe because that's in a universe where clearly Abby does look the way she looks, so...
So your reason for Abby's design being reasonable is that she does look as she does in the game? So the claim is proof of the claim here. The proof for the existence of God is in this Bible that states that God exists. Great reasoning there, Jim.
It's not a debate.
23 minutes, Jim. 23 minutes, and likely more given how long it probably took to make it. To debate the design of the character that you apparently think has no debate to argue for. Why would you waste your time writing a script, getting the right image cards out, all the transitions, sounds, and evidence at your disposal if you thought it wasn't worth arguing? Of course you thought it was worth arguing. Don't fucking lie to me.
You know, some of the comments we've looked at here...
Asterisk on the looked as cherry-picked.
Some of the comments I've seen continue to sprout and spew forth from people's diseased mouths are still literally trying to claim that muscular women don't exist, or are certainly such unicorn-esque rarities that they shouldn't be seen in a video game.
Who said that, Jim? Because even in the cherry-picked comments you brought, not a single person ever made the argument that no such muscular woman exists, or that because Abby's design is that she shouldn't be allowed to exist as such. I feel like I'm reiterating myself here, but it's ultimately Jim who keeps reinforcing his own made-up bullshit that has me trudging through the last legs of this video slowly.
And that's what it all comes down to.
Nope. And even you yourself know that once again. And even if that was the case, you'd still be better off trying to make better arguments in favor of the contrary than whatever this sad attempt at one was, or you saying that there is no debate while still peddling the same shitty argument.
These people shouldn't be seen, and these people shouldn't be heard. If they're not the absolute bog-standard factory default setting protagonist, then gamers don't want them to be around.
Boy, that straw man just keeps getting wailed on over and over again. And boy, it sure is fun to witness Jim barking at the moon, thinking he's buying it.
They will scream about, oh, forced diversity, when they see just a shred of diversity.
Thing is, I don't even know if Abby's design was a result of forced diversity, and Ideally, when it comes to a particular setting in a particular game, diversity of a given skin color should not be your first concern. I didn't complain about lack of diversity when it came to watching Black Panther, or complain about a lack of diversity when it came to watching Saving Private Ryan, because both made sense in the context not to have a reading rainbow of faces. You wouldn't want a bunch of white people roaming around as part of the Zulu tribes in South Africa, would you? Of course you wouldn't. Yet, when it's the other way around, that's when it's a problem. Why the dishonesty, Jim? Why waste your time if you aren't willing to have a debate, nor think it's worth the time to have one?
Games are less diverse than real life is.
Games shouldn't reflect real life for starters, and even if what you're saying is true, means that it should be perfectly okay for Kingdom Come, or Mordhau, to not have black people in it because games are less diverse than real life.
But look at me, accidentally falling into the trap of trying to seriously debate people who claim they want to debate.
You've been falling in that trap for roughly 22 minutes and 46 seconds now, and only now you've realized you're falling in it? You've hit rock bottom at this point, but, of course, you're going to state that the people who claim to want a debate don't want one, despite you literally stating for one that there's no debate, and you apparently getting comments that you should debate people on this topic, meaning there is people who want to. And for the last fucking time, what's the point of feigning the notion of having a debate while also having a debate for it, Jim? You've become as consistent in the inconsistency of your arguments as Anita Sarkeesian now.
But actually don't give a fuck, they're just very scared of things that are different.
Not giving a fuck and being scared of something are not mutually exclusive reactions to have for a character's design. And if you know the people who are making the argument aren't sincere, why are you treating them like as if they are? Why are you even giving them the time of day to laugh at you taking them 100% seriously while acknowledging you've taken the bait and lost the game?
And that's why they don't thank God for me. Even though they should. Or at the very least they should thank God that Joel died, because he was shit. He was shit.
Ooh, you just gotta get that one last stab at people who like Joel while also stabbing yourself in the process, as you yourself liked Joel previously up until now it's time to be a contrarian and hate him for no other reason but because other people don't like Abby. And Jim, if you're going to painfully try to coax sympathy out of me by implying that people questioning Abby's design is equivalent to people questioning your gender, you best not to demonize the other side of that demographic time and time again. In fact, your analogy is perfect. You start out by being an utter piece of shit, then expect other people to sympathize with you after the fact when one doesn't justify the other. So yes, by that analogy alone, you would be comparable to Abby, but not for the reasons you think. And that was it. Finally, I can't believe I wasted all that time debating a topic that clearly wasn't up for debate, according to Jim. Yeah, I've been antagonistic to you, Jim, for a time here, but unlike you, I'm not going to gussy up the excuse with insisting we shouldn't talk about these things while also talking about these things. My anger for you comes from a place knowing you're fucking better than this, Jim, and you have proven to be better than this. When it came to Movie Bob, I lost any hope from him to be consistent in his arguments or his principles, so there was no point for me to watch his videos or to reason with someone so far gone. Even so, I wouldn't therefore make assumptions about what Movie Bob said unless he said it himself, or use his comments as indicative of a greater whole of a given community. I'm disappointed because you're becoming just like him, chin reared up in the sky so as not to look at your opposition in the face for the contempt you have for them, not realizing that you've buried your head in the sand. I can insult you, Jim, in spite of me railing on you for insulting other people because I'm not the one insinuating that all gamers think the way that you think they do, nor is it in service of making strawmans about your character or your intentions, as I have the quotes word for word to prove it. While you might think me a hypocrite regarding this, I hold myself to the standard that anyone should be as abrasive as they want, but more importantly, I hold other people to the standard that they set themselves to a much higher degree. So if you want people to be nice and polite to trans people, yet are perfectly fine generalizing those who question Abby's character as little more than depraved white boys, I'm going to call you out on your bluff. But ultimately, this has been an exercise in futility, because I have no clue what argument you were trying to make. Whether we should care about realism in a game or not, whether Abby's design is debatable or not, whether people's issues with Abby are or are not substantiated beyond just her muscles. And with you being keen on shutting out the opposition while also assuming the opposition arguments, likely will never hear me out or even know this video's existence. But if you do, Jim, I only have this passing line to say: you are your greatest enemy.